This week, SpaceX won the space race with a single move so mundane that nobody even noticed. They flew a rocket, landed it, and turned it around for the next flight. 20 years ago, that sentence would have gotten you laughed out of the room, but today, even Amazon, SpaceX's biggest competitor, is paying them just to keep up. For the entire history of spaceflight, one rule held: rockets were throwaway machines. You spent tens of millions of dollars building something incredibly complex. You used it once for about 9 minutes, and then you let the most expensive part fall into the ocean. The next flight needed a brand new one. Nearly every rocket ever built was basically a giant single-use firework. For decades, flying an orbital booster even a second time was seen as almost impossible. SpaceX broke that rule. Then they kept going way past the point anyone expected. B-1081 flying 25 times sounds extreme, until you hear it isn't even the record. Just days earlier, SpaceX flew one booster for the 33rd time and another for the 34th, both landing on the same ship. These days, 25 flights is middle-aged. The miracle turned into the baseline. And here's the contrast that should land hard. It took the Space Shuttle program about 30 years to fly 135 times. SpaceX flew Falcon 9 74 times in less than 6 months of 2026. Same fundamental challenge of reaching orbit, a completely different pace, and almost nobody even noticed the second number. So here is what that silence actually means. You can measure how completely a technology has won by how bored people are with it. Nobody claps when a passenger jet lands, even though bringing 100 tons of metal full of people down softly is an amazing thing. The clapping stopped because it became normal, and normal is the highest compliment engineering can earn. SpaceX's biggest flex right now is that landing a rocket for the 25th time doesn't feel like a flex. That changes what a booster even is. A rocket stage used to be something you used once and lost, like a fired bullet. A booster at 25 flights is something different. It's fleet hardware, checked and inspected and flown again, the way an airline runs the same plane day after day. Rockets are still far harder to turn around than jets. SpaceX just decided that's an engineering problem to grind down, not a law of physics. And that boring reliability matters far beyond Starlink. NASA's plan to put astronauts back on the moon now leans on SpaceX doing the same thing with a much bigger rocket. SpaceX can't just fly one Starship to the moon. The moon lander burns so much fuel that it has to be refilled once it reaches orbit. So before any crew leaves Earth, SpaceX has to launch a fuel depot, fly up a string of tanker Starships to haul super cold fuel to it, pump it across in space, and only then send the lander to the moon. That turns one moon trip into a months-long campaign. NASA's own watchdog says it takes more than 10 tanker flights, about one every 6 days, just to store enough fuel in orbit. And that has to start more than 200 days before the crew lifts off. NASA needs more than a Starship that flies. It needs Starship to get boring, the way Falcon 9 did. But the rocket is only the part you can see. Flying this often takes more than a good booster. It takes a whole machine behind it. SpaceX launched about once every 2.5 days this year. To pull that off, a lot has to click at the same time. The booster gets checked and rebuilt, the engines get inspected, the pad gets reset, a ship waits in the right spot at sea, the fairings get recovered and reused, new satellites roll off the line, and the range, the weather, and the regulators all line up. This was SpaceX's 74th Falcon 9 flight of 2026, and every one of them proves that whole chain still runs at full speed, and where it launches from matters more than you'd think. This one flew out of Vandenberg in California. That base is much more than a backup for the Florida pads. It's how SpaceX reaches orbits that Florida can't easily hit, sending Starlink satellites south over the Pacific to cover the polar parts of the network. The booster landed on a ship with the very SpaceX name, "Of Course I Still Love You," about 8.5 minutes after liftoff. Then it headed back to port to get ready for the next flight. It launches, lands at sea, drops off its satellites, and goes again, over and over, from 2 coasts at once. The repetition is what SpaceX is really building here. So why does SpaceX fly this much in the first place? The answer is Starlink, and this is where the plan gets really clever. This was the 59th Starlink mission of the year. So most of those 74 Falcon 9 flights were SpaceX launching satellites for its own network. Starlink now has nearly 10,700 active satellites in orbit, and that number hides something important. Starlink is a living system that has to be fed all the time. The satellites don't last forever. Down in low orbit, the thin air drags on them, radiation wears them out, and they get brought down on purpose after only about 4 to 6 years. So SpaceX has to keep launching just to stay even, swapping out dying satellites and upgrading old ones as it goes. Growing the network is only part of it. A big share of all this flying is simply upkeep on a system that is always wearing out and being rebuilt above your head. Now put the two halves together, because this is the loop other companies can't easily copy. Starlink needs a huge, steady stream of launches. That steady demand is what keeps Falcon 9 flying often enough to make heavy reuse worth it. And cheap, reusable launches are what make running a 10,000 satellite network affordable at all. The network feeds the rockets, and the rockets feed the network. And here's the part that should keep rival companies awake. Everyone else chasing this market has to buy their rides to orbit. Take Amazon, which is building its own satellite internet network called Amazon LEO, the project you probably know as Kuiper. It's racing to catch Starlink, but it doesn't own a rocket that can carry the load, so it has to rent its launches, and some of those rentals come from SpaceX, its single biggest rival. Amazon has fallen so far behind its deadline that it recently bought a fresh batch of Falcon 9 flights from SpaceX just to keep up. Its competitor is also its landlord. That's the trap. SpaceX owns the whole chain: the rocket, the recovery ships, the satellite factory, the network, and the customer paying the bill. Starlink looks like an internet company, and it is one. But the deeper truth is that it's an internet company that also owns the railroad its rivals are forced to rent. There is still one genuine unknown in all of this. We know Falcon 9 can fly again. What nobody knows yet is how far it can be pushed. The question used to be whether the rocket could survive another flight. Now it's how many times a booster can fly before fixing up an old one costs more than building a new one. Nobody has hit that limit yet, and SpaceX keeps pushing it higher. Every extra flight is a fresh test of the engines, the tanks, the landing gear, and the repair bills, and each one hands SpaceX data nobody else has. And the most telling part is the boring one. There was no big milestone this week, no record broken, just a 25-time veteran rocket doing its job so smoothly that the world shrugged. That shrug is the moat. SpaceX did not just make rocket reuse work, they made it boring. And in engineering, boring is what impossible looks like after it has been conquered. So here's the real question. Is this loop a lead nobody can catch, or is it one bad booster away from cracking? Tell me where you land, because the next 25-flight rocket is already on the pad, and SpaceX is betting you won't even look up.